The Galactic Council had one unbreakable rule about humans. Never let them near the young. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival instinct. Humans were predators wearing prey's clothing, apex hunters who'd clawed their way from a death world to the stars. Their reflexes were too fast, their strength too unpredictable, their primal instincts too deeply rooted. The Council's xenobiologists had warned that human bonding behaviors could trigger catastrophic misunderstandings. But Leora Wren hadn't read the memo. Or rather, she'd read it and thrown it in the recycler. She'd been assigned to the diplomatic station orbiting Threshold Prime as a cultural liaison, a role that mostly involved explaining why humans shook hands instead of exchanging pheromone signatures. The Vraxian delegation occupied the adjacent quarters, massive, scaled beings whose homeworld boasted predators that made Earth's dinosaurs look like house pets. Their species had ruled their planet's apex for millions of years. They feared nothing. Except, apparently, the dark. Leora had learned this at 3 a.m. station time when something small, warm, and trembling pushed open her unlocked door. Corin was barely 4 solar cycles old, a Vraxian cub no larger than a German shepherd, though his scales already gleamed like polished obsidian and his claws could shred titanium. He stood in her doorway, bioluminescent tears tracking down his snout, his tail wrapped tight around his hind leg. "Bad dream," he whimpered in broken common, the translator chip in his ear struggling with his youth-slurred speech. Leora's hindbrain screamed at her predator, threat, danger. Her training catalogued his retractable claws, the developing venom sacs behind his jaw ridges, the muscular tail that would one day crush bones. Her heart saw a terrified child. "Come here, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling back her thermal blanket. Corin didn't hesitate. He scrambled across the room with surprising grace and burrowed into her side, his scales cold against her sleep-warmed skin. She could feel the rapid flutter of his 3-chambered heart, smell the ozone and copper scent of Vraxian fear sweat. "Saw the endless," he murmured, pressing his snout against her shoulder. "The dark that eats stars." Leora wrapped her arms around him, one hand instinctively stroking the ridge between his neural spines, a gesture she'd seen Vraxian parents use in the station's common areas. "Just a dream, Corin. The dark can't hurt you. Father says dark is where Vrax hunt. Where we're strongest." "Your father's right," Leora agreed softly. "But even the strongest hunters need to rest. Even the dark needs the dawn." She began humming an old Earth lullaby, something her grandmother had sung in Urdu, a melody transcending the lost words. Corin's breathing gradually slowed, his scales warming as his metabolism relaxed. Within minutes, the apex predator cub was snoring softly, his claws retracted, his tail loosening its anxious coil. Leora stayed awake longer, marveling at the trust. Humans had spent millennia as both hunter and hunted, learning to read intent in the twitch of a muscle, the shift of weight. She felt no threat from this child, only the universal vulnerability of youth. She didn't know when she fell asleep, but dawn came to the station in simulated amber light filtering through the viewport. It came with company. The door hissed open with emergency override codes. Ambassador Krath and his mate Sierra filled the doorway, each standing 3 meters tall, their scales midnight dark, their eyes blazing with protective fury. Behind them, 2 Vraxian security officers had weapons drawn, and Station Commander Yol looked like he'd aged a decade. The tableau froze. Corin lay sprawled across Leora's chest, one small claw hand clutching her sleeve shirt, his tail wrapped loosely around her leg. Leora's arm was draped over him protectively, her other hand resting on the ridge of his spine. In sleep, the human and the apex predator cub formed a portrait of perfect tranquility. "Don't move," Commander Yol breved, his hand hovering over his cum unit, probably ready to call medical teams to scrape up what remained of his cultural liaison. Leora's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light. She registered the armed Vraxians, the horror on Yol's face, the killing rage in Ambassador Krath's posture, and the way that rage warred with confusion. She smiled drowsily. "Morning, coffee?" "Human," Krath rumbled, his voice like continental plates grinding together. "Move away from my son, slowly." "Dad?" Corin stirred, blinking up at his parents with sleepy confusion. "Had nightmare." "Leora said dark needs dawn too." He yawned, displaying rows of needle-sharp teeth, then nuzzled back against the human's shoulder. "Warm, safe." Sarah's combat posture fractured. "Safe? With a human?" "She sings away the endless," Corin explained with a child's perfect logic. Smells like pack, like ... home dem. The security officers exchanged bewildered looks. Commander Yol's jaw worked soundlessly. Ambassador Krath's scales rippled with a complex pattern that Leora's cultural database identified as profound cognitive dissonance. Leora sat up carefully, keeping one hand on Corin's back. He was scared. I wasn't going to turn away a frightened kid. She met Krath's eyes without flinching, a gesture that among Vraxians meant either challenge or absolute fearlessness. Ambassador, I know what the protocols say. I know what your people think of mine. But he's 4. And he had a nightmare. Krath stared at her for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped to his son, who was making small, contented chirping sounds against the human side, his bioluminescent markers flickering in patterns associated with deep security and comfort. You could have killed him without effort, Krath said quietly. Our young are vulnerable until their 6th cycle. You're strong enough to— So are you? Leora interrupted gently. You're strong enough to crush me with one hand. But you won't, because strength isn't the same as intent. She stroked Corin's spine one more time. Besides, he's pack. That's what humans do. We protect our pack, no matter what they look like. Sarah moved first, approaching with the careful grace of her species. She touched her son's head, felt his relaxed muscles, smelled the complete absence of distress pheromones. Her eyes golden with vertical slits studied Leora with new intensity. The council was wrong about your kind, she said finally. They're wrong about a lot of things, Leora agreed. Usually because they're too scared to check. Corin yawned again and looked up at his mother. Can Leora come to morning feast? She should meet clutchmates. Ambassador Krath's laugh was like thunder in a Copper Canyon, surprised and genuine. The human wants to meet 12 Vraxian cubs before coffee? Leora grinned. Make it strong coffee and you've got a deal. As they left her quarters, Corin riding on her shoulders. His tail wrapped contentedly around her neck. Commander Yol updated the Galactic Council's human protocols. New addendum. Humans are dangerous, but perhaps not in the ways we thought. Perhaps the most dangerous thing about them is how easily they make you family.